Chapter 22. Beatings and Whatnot. 1. I'd seen the striped shirt before. The young man wearing the blue and yellow had been following me. His eye contact caused me to fall into a state of slight panic, even though there was no logical reason to worry. I'd been so bold just a moment before, until he reappeared. "Excuse me." I stepped toward him. He turned immediately and walked the opposite way. But then, with a decision already made, and opposing the fear within me, I followed, cutting through the street's buzz, gaining ground on him with the brisk pace. He stepped off the curb, shooting across the street. With nerves surging and heart racing, I darted across after him. I sensed he would slip away. "Hey!" He kept walking, checking over his shoulder. "Hey!" I shouted harshly again. He stopped. He didn't turn around, but only stopped in his tracks. "Why are you following me?" "Finnegan?" he said as he turned to face me. My intellect was in overdrive. I was confused, to say the least, trying to put together a suddenly complicated puzzle. I felt my eyes drop and dance back and forth, searching for logical explanations as to how he would know my name. "How do you know my name?" I asked with volume still elevated. "Sir! Sir!" Two young voices called from behind me. I turned to see two boys running toward me. Their faces were painted in fear and exhaustion as they approached. I turned back to Striped Sweater from this distraction. I was not surprised that he had fled. I sighed. Turning back again, the younger ones, they approached me quickly. My hands went up instinctively as if to slow them from running through me. "Whoa!" I cried. Stacked high, as much as their cupped hands could carry, were cassette tapes, tracts, and pamphlets, all of which, of course, had come from our team. At least, from the others on our team. "Hasrat Isa! No, no, no!" each of them said, echoing one another, handing me their collection of religious paraphernalia, shaking from the terror that was following them. The boys ran. The men were about a dozen, old and young. Gray. That was the color of the old man's eyes. Gray as a cold, rain-blanketed sky. His screaming was upward, into my face. The language was Arabic, and the smell was curry. It cut through the stench of the rotten everything. I'm sure he was an imam, as per the way people surrounded him as an entourage. A younger man stepped forward. "What for you in come?" His question wasn't a question as much as it was a command. "I am here to bring peace," I hurriedly said as they pressed in on me. The pull backward was shocking. One of the clan had a method of taking the backpack from me that was a little zealous, but I suppose it was effective. Once on the ground and the pack yanked away, I saw one of the men fighting with the zipper on the bag. He had on headgear that was similar to the old man. 2 or 3 others were screaming as they flipped through the pamphlets about Jesus that had fallen on the ground from the initial pull. I struggled for breath as the energy of their anger escalated. Their language became more quickened as they fought to yell over one another, about me, at me. Their purpose was clear, to discover the source for this blasphemy and punish the infidel on the spot. I remember the first kick as it approached my face. I couldn't respond quickly enough before the thunk sent the warning signal to my arms and legs to cover, to run, to fight. Instead, I crumpled. I felt water and then mud rushing into my mouth. As I rolled, I gasped for air, responding to the stomp into my stomach. I suppose there is a measure of fortune in that only so many people can kick you or beat you at one time. Even with the growing number of spectators and participants in my beating, I spied an open distance through the blood and the mud, through the hatred. Without my backpack, jacket, a quarter of my shirt, and one of my shoes, I ran. I ran for my life. 2. The metal left my hand, momentarily equalizing the world for my sake. It entered a snowbank on the side of the road, most likely hiding itself from its victor in order to satisfy the one who had failed. My young mind felt vindication that maybe God was on my side. But in hindsight, it wasn't vindication at all. It was just me basking in the darkness of my heart, rejoicing in wrongdoing. It had never found its way back to my friend to express to him his worth in this world, or at least in that race. And besides his worth in this world, and I only speculate, he failed to have a grasp of his worth to the one who made him. He failed to understand the value of others, especially the downtrodden, the broken ones, those who were afraid. Dana. Maybe it was my lot in life to come in last. As the iron bars to my heart had been broken, one by one, I wondered if God would show himself to me, and if there were a time that he would demonstrate his paradoxical ways on my behalf. I believed it would have been then, as I ran through the marketplace with only one shoe. I began to move through the masses and the fruit stands with more agility and balance than I knew I possessed. The experience can only be explained as supernatural. To what end this chase had for me, I did not know. But I did know, in that race for my own life, that the roar of false religion wasn't going to have mine easily. The flutter caused me to fall. The panicked wings of the bird escaped my hurry. As I found my feet again, I realized that there was a bridge. It was narrow and bottlenecked with an impoverished gathering. The ones who sought my death were catching up to me, and many bystanders were looking at me as if I were from another planet. I thought left, because the mosque was to the right on my side of the river. But there she was, the woman. But her eyes were clear, a deep brown, yet her face was the same. "Run!" Her voice boomed, and her arm thrust upward, pointing in the direction I didn't want to go. I couldn't move. I stood there, fixed to the ground. Then, tossing logic to the side, I trusted the old woman and ran as hard as I could muster. With just a quick glance, I could see there were several dozen men who'd joined the chase. I surmised, too, quickly, that a few were breaking away, bent over onto their knees, gasping for air. To them, I wasn't a prize worth the effort. Still, to many more, I was a trophy worth attaining, worth killing, gutting, and maybe mounting my head onto a space on the empty wall of their lean-to shack, or more likely letting my head fall onto the street for all to see after one quick swing of a blade. My breath was in my chest. The air was cold. Finding safety was paramount. But where? With whom? Did Billy see me getting attacked? I didn't know. My pace had begun to slow. I turned to the right. The street was narrow and only cut through one block, a dead end. Straight ahead was a gate, manned by a guard carrying a rifle. He wore a mustard-colored beret, cocked to the side. I'm not sure what he said when he saw me, but the English equivalent was, "Oh, shit." I suppose that anywhere on Earth, to see a blood-covered, red-headed white man with torn skin and a crazy one-shoed outfit would be a vision to avoid if at all possible. The gate was tall, matching the height of the walls, taller than any man could jump. Across the top of those fortress-like walls, and even the gate, was razor wire, rolled like I'd known as from my days as a soldier. The angry herd followed me to this place. The closer I came to the young man, the more I knew he was my only way. My fate was in his hands as he made his quick decision. The masses in chase seemed to trigger in him action. Just as he swung his rifle strap over his opposite shoulder to free up his hands, the gate began to open. Another guard was lackadaisical about the gate, until he saw the approach of me and my pursuers. As I entered their immediate area, my intercessor waved for me to approach even more quickly. The gate was open, just enough for me to run through. The young guard followed me in, pulling the gate closed behind him. I fell to the muddy ground, narrowly missing the edge of a bumper of a car. The weight of a falling knee into the center of my back rivaled any of the punches or kicks I'd received minutes prior. I heard the air grunt out of me. I felt him struggling against himself, searching. Another guard joined him, standing with his AK-47 aimed downward toward my head. He stood above me, speaking to the first guard in Arabic. My foreign ears did not understand, except that it was in a commanding tone. Meanwhile, the weight of the people pressed against the large, secure gate. It flexed inward, as if King Kong himself was busting into the fort of the tribe. The chase had come to an end, but I crossed the finish line first. They pulled my hands behind my back and pressed my face into the muddy yard. "You can have it if you want," I heard Troy say. The medal was mine that day. The snow began to fall. Winter was coming. 3. "Defend yourself! Defend yourself!" was the demand of a man. The man seemed to be only pretending to be a reporter. I imagined him as a man who was manning his retail stand just down the street from here, who responded to the alert from his partner of his second business, the local newspaper. As the buck-toothed man fumbled to get the camera ready, the tall reporter, who looked to maybe have come from a well-to-do family, continued to bark his requests at me for comment. He followed as the guards guided me across the snow into the brick building. I kept my head down, unwilling to speak to anyone at that point, especially someone in the press. "Don't go in anyone's living quarters, even if they beg and plead," was one of the warnings. Another was to look for those with digging questions, like, "How many of you are there?" or "Where are you staying?" Basic things, really. So to not respond to a reporter in a high-stress situation wasn't too much of a challenge. I'd been carried from one police compound to the next after that. Each location had a man in charge who would vehemently resist taking me in. On occasion, there would be the English translation, explaining that they were protecting me from the people. And the people, according to the report, were saying that 2 of the Americans were dead, and the exercise of justice must be that those blaspheming were to be stoned to death, beheaded, or killed by a fusillade of bullets fired at close range. The hallway was long. My snow-soaked shoe squeaked on the floor, with an alternating splock, schwick from the frozen foot with only a filthy sponge for a sock. Heads were poking out of each door as I was led to the room at the end. I was a spectacle, an unwanted attraction for the day. There was an imam. His beard was long, and it swayed like a tuft of gathered wheat as he thrust his arm in and out, pointing into the face of whoever was on the other side of the wall, whoever was on the other side of the desk. "No!" the man behind the wall thundered in response. Another guard stepped from the side into my view as I was carried their way. He, too, was the recipient of the crashing rejection. His shoulders flinched with the next, "No." This time, though, there was a more quiet tone of explanation after the harsh veto, then followed by reasoning. Finally, with the knock at the doorframe from my escort, we entered. The room was unlike any I'd seen in any of the other police buildings. There were bulletins and letters pinned all over the walls. Behind the leader's desk was a map that was detailed with streets and buildings. It could have covered the entire city, but it could have been a map of anything, for all I knew. I felt a push from behind to enter fully into the room. The imam wouldn't look at me, but the eyes of the leader and the guard went to the right. And there they were, all 5 of them. Otis smiled at me through the gash breaking open his upper and lower lips. He scrunched his eyes as he looked at me. Even through his battered face, I could see that he was happy to see me. The others looked as if they were nearing the finish of digging their own graves. Hopeless. 4. The bus had been remodeled by a madman. The seats were ripped out and replaced with rail benches long ways along the length of the bus sides. There were 12 guards, 6 of us, and a driver. Until we cleared out of the town, they had us sit on the floor with our heads ducked down. We passed the town's edge, and the population disappeared quickly. It was then that they let us sit up and into a seat next to them as we coursed the roads. I only know now, not then, that the reason for this was to keep our location from the oppressed and zealous who sought our death to satisfy their thirst. "Where are you taking us?" Otis asked the 2 guards seated across from him. The answer was but a gaze of inconvenience. "Can you tell us anything? Can you tell us what we did wrong?" Otis pressed with a subdued voice, knowing full well what we did wrong. The 2 looked at one another in silent conversation. However, as you might expect, an answer did not come. Religious leaders and townspeople, the ones who wanted us given over for them to execute justice, feared the people who had us. They were the corrupt police, the Pakistani militants. At this point, we didn't know who it was who had us. My guess was militants. And these men, the ones who owned us, were found in small groups, in pockets all over the mountains into which we traveled that day. The steel bench was flat, and each bump in the road was exaggerated by a vehicle without shocks and the cold. The ride was without concern for comfort. I'd decided to look outside, to avoid eye contact. I watched the mountains increase as the scene continued to change for a much more dramatic view. The sun had begun to set. The further we went north, the closer it was to dark. The snow, too, had begun to fall. The flakes were large, like pieces of wet, coin-sized paper. The driver dropped the bus down into a lower gear as it struggled upward into the mountains. Sometimes it sounded as though the motor was going to pop clean through the bus. A man in his makeshift uniform moved about like he was an air traffic controller as we rolled into the compound. The driver backed up to the large building. The face of it looked like the warehouse at the Port Authority, with more of a Russian Art Deco appearance. The lines were sharp. It was made of poured concrete, a depressing gray fortress. Its windows were dark and weathered. "Okay," was the word that burst through the cold, damp air. Followed was a short, old guard entering the bifold doors. "Let's go." He thrust his finger into the air, making a circular motion. Our armed companions all stood, assisting us to stand. One by one, we exited the vehicle. As my foot stretched off the bottom step of the bus, the cold, crushed rock and icy leftovers from the last snow crunched under my only shoe. 5. "This is very unfortunate," said the old guard. He lowered his eyes and wagged his head as if this were unavoidable, that this was the only possible solution to the problem we created through breaking their laws. He directed us to sit against a wall. The younger guard mimicked him from behind, only without words. "That wall only! That wall only!" he emphasized twice. 2 others walked in our cell, tossing us blankets that were the old wool and folded into tight little flat squares. "No sleep," he pleaded with seriousness, with 2 hands against the side of his face, the international sign for sleep. There was a hole in the floor, in the corner, across the way. It was the size of a foot, maybe smaller. A faucet was just off the floor behind it. I'd been in that area of the world long enough to know it would be there that prisoners take a shit. And the water, I was sure, and later confirmed, would be slow and for one purpose, to clean up afterward. "Down, down. When we come, you sit. Stay down there," the old guard said as if we were disobedient dogs. We nodded that we understood his instruction. The heavy door clicked with the sound of craftsmanship, and the rattle of keys followed. They walked away, and for the first time in many hours, we were alone together. The wind pushed and whistled through the cell. The Art Deco building was built with a large breezeway throughout its center, an unkempt garden with piles of snow covering the unroofed area in the center of the building, like a giant hexagon-shaped donut. The breezeway itself was designed that we could look out, or rather that guards could look in, and they'd be able to see into many of the cells at once from nearly any position in the corridor. Not that you'd want to look out into the other cells at decrepit prisoners. The place was frozen. All that moved were guards. We saw food trays pass by us for the first couple days. In the beginning, our priority was that we just wanted the beatings to stop, the time in jail to end, and the temperature to rise. But after a couple of days, food became just as important. A longing, minute by minute, for the pain to stop, only to be greeted by more hunger and sharper pain. We were strongly urged to drink water, only I didn't want water. At least that's how it felt, that I wasn't thirsty. "I'll tell you whose fault this is," Alan said, like he was a disgruntled employee. "Bart's." Although I agreed with the sentiment, I knew such comments only made the hours more miserable and filled with resentment. Dominic gave him a sharp look of disagreement. "Where is he, Dominic? Do you see him here?" "I don't," Alan continued. "Alan, Bart couldn't have known this would happen," Dominic defended. "It's been 3 days, and all of you know that if we don't get out of here soon, we'll be deemed as an expense. And you know what a business wants to do with unnecessary expenses? I know. You get rid of it." "Alan," Billy said, attempting to calm him. "Don't Alan me, Billy. This is bullshit." "Watch your language," Otis began to correct him. Don't tell me I can't say bullshit. That's bullshit, and you know it. I'm stuck here with a bunch of pussies." I sat, wrapped up and balled tightly, my body crumpled and folded to get my entire length beneath the sorry excuse for a blanket, always seated up against the wall in case the guards walked past. My eyes darted from one end of the cell to the other as they bickered. When we talked, sometimes it was hard to hear a guard's footsteps coming down the corridor. I listened, agreeing with Alan except for the personal attacks. I despised him, so I didn't dare defend him.